asked to speak about it. I had spoken about it, I thought last year, but when I actually looked up, it's been 2 years since I spoke about Makar Sankranti, and that just made me aware of how fast time is going past, right? And so Makar Sankranti is also related to timing. So every time the sun moves from one zodiac to another, it's called Sankrant. And so technically we have 12 Sankrantis every single year. But we celebrate Makar Sankranti as a very special festival. And that is the reason because the sun starts moving into the northern hemisphere, okay, into the Makara Rashi, which is Capricorn. Okay. So the sun starts moving into the Capricorn Rashi zodiac, and that is celebrated as Makara Sankranti. And it is also known as Uttarayan. Some of you may have heard that term. Uttarayan. So the sun is moving into the Uttar aspect. Uttar is the north. Similarly, in the month of July, the sun finishes its travel in the northern hemisphere and starts moving into the southern hemisphere. So what is that going to be called? Dakshinaya, because Dakshin means south. So those are the two main Sankrantis that we are all kind of aware of. But the most important one we celebrated is the Makara Sankranti. And it's very important, celebrated all across, specifically across India in different parts of the country. And every part does different things. It's called by different names. For example, in North India, it's known as Lohri, right? Where you have the revdi and all that stuff. Sweet and sesame seeds. These are two things that are very typical, and you see it in all parts of the country. In Gujarat, they celebrate it as a kite festival, as a Sankranti. So you will see that typically in that season, in January, a lot of people will have kites. Even growing up, I remember having, flying kites. And in the southern part of India, it's called Pongal. Right? So we see that this movement of the sun into the zodiac sign is celebrated as an auspicious time across the different parts of India. And now that we are all here, we also try to keep our traditions by celebrating these festivals here. So I specifically asked to talk a little bit about Makar Sankranti. So people do different things. They have family gatherings. They may have melas, like in India in the past, they used to have like these congregation of people. And every 12 years, on Makar Sankranti, we host the Kumbh Mela. So the Kumbh Mela is held in different parts, but this specific one is always hosted in Prayag, where you have the Triveni Sangam. And some of you may remember that last year, around this time, was one of the huge, biggest kind of Kumbh Melas that was hosted in Prayag. And some of you may have even gone there to take a bath in the Ganga and in the Sangam. So that's one of the things that is done during Sankranti, like people visit holy rivers and take a bath in the holy rivers and get rid of their sins. Isn't that like an easy solution to get rid of sins? You just fly to India, jump into the Ganga and you're done. Right? It's not that simple, but definitely it has a very cleansing effect, and some people may get reaction from just taking a bath in the Ganga, right? Because you're getting rid of so many different types of sins. So Kumbh Mela is one of the hallmarks of this Uttarayan festival or Makara Sankranti. So we saw that just last year, and now we do it for many, many years before it happens again. This day also has some other significances, particularly for in the Vaishnava culture. It's a day when Lord Chaitanya took sannyas. So Lord Chaitanya is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who started the Hare Krishna movement across India, and on our altar, when the doors open, you can see there will be Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda on the very first altar. So that was also on Makara Sankranti. It is an important thing. Then there is another story that you might know that happened. There was a prince, Bhagirath, or king. He performed a lot of austerity. and he wanted to bring Ganga down on the earthly planet, because Ganga usually is in the heavenly planets, flows in the heaven, it comes from the spiritual world, touches the toe of the Lord Vishnu, and falls into the heavenly planets. But Bhagirath wanted to bring Ganga on earth, so he had to perform a lot of austerity, and eventually she kind of fell from the heavenly planets down. Some of you may remember reading this story in Amar Chitragatha. I remember reading it in Amar Chitragatha. Only now I have like some scriptures that I can refer to and confirm all of these stories. So she was brought down to the earthly planet, and then she literally like followed Bhagirath to where he wanted Ganga to flow, and eventually she flows into the Bay of Bengal. So it is still celebrated as the Ganga Sagar Mela. So Ganga meeting the Sagar, and then there is a big festival. And from Mayapur there are many devotees. They go there, and every year there's like a yatra, Ganga Sagar Mela. It's a big festival. So that also happens on Uttarayan. So there are many different events that happen. For us, relevant for us is the installation of Radha Ras Bihari. How many of you have visited Radha Ras Bihari? It's our biggest ISKCON temple, the main center in Juhu, in Mumbai. And it was one of our landmark temples at that time, because Srila Prabhupada himself had to fight a lot to get the land installed. There's a lot of controversy with government officials and police, and a lot of story behind that. And at that time, the Shiva Sena chief, Bal Thackeray, if somebody remembers him, in fact their party didn't do very well right now, but that's a whole different story. We don't want to get into recent events. But they had assisted actually Srila Prabhupada to help have that temple finally happen. And 2 months after Prabhupada left the planet, he was not there for the installation in person, but happened on Uttarayan Day, Uttara Sankran. So that's also a big landmark for us, because Juhu is still considered to be ISKCON India. Right? So we have hundreds of temples, but Juhu is like what is recognized as the official ISKCON center. And it's a really, really gorgeous temple. So if you ever land in Mumbai, next time you go to India, you should definitely, it's very close to the airport also, and they have accommodation there which you can book, so you should definitely visit. So that also happened on Makar Sankranti. So there are many things that are related to this day, but specifically today, I wanted to talk about Bhishma Dev. So one of the things that is associated with Uttarayan is the passing of Bhishma Dev, or Bhishma Pitama, because he left his body on the day of Uttarayan. So just some background about Bhishma, many of you may already know. But Bhishma was a very prominent personality in the Kuru dynasty. He was a son of Shantanu and Ganga. And when Shantanu wanted to marry his second wife, which is Satyavati, she was very insistent that my sons, whenever I have them, should become the king. And so the only impediment in that relationship was Bhishma. His name was Devavrat at that time. So Devavrat, being who he was, said that I am taking this vow of celibacy. I will never marry or have any child. And not only that, I will always serve the Kuru dynasty. And he will serve the king, whoever is the king. And so that is known as the Bhishma Pratigya, because it was so harsh and it was so huge. And since then he started being called Bhishma, because of his the strong vow, very difficult vow. So that was Bhishma. And so as time passed, then we are at the time of the Kauravas and the Pandavas, and then we all know that there was this war. And Bhishma actually, the Pandavas, especially Arjuna, was very favorite of Bhishma Dev, but he was bound by his vows. And so no matter whether he knew that the Kauravas were wrong and the Adharmic and Pandavas were on the side of Dharma, Krishna was on the side of Dharma and the Pandavas, he still had to fight with the Kauravas. So many instances in the Mahabharata show that in order to follow his vows, sometimes Bhishma Dev is seen to be on the side of adharma, and he got a lot of criticism for that. Not only then, but even 500 years later, 5,000 years later, Bhishma Dev still gets criticized because he chose the side of the Kauravas. So despite of being so strong, powerful and religious, he had to stay on the side of the Kauravas. For example, when there was the incident of Draupadi, the Kauravas tried to disrobe Draupadi in an assembly of so many people, but yet Bhishma Dev just sat on his asana and didn't do anything. She had husbands there who were powerful, so powerful, but they couldn't do anything. There was Dhritarashtra, who was the king. He couldn't do anything. So there were so many powerful people in there, sitting and just watching the scene unfold. And then finally Draupadi asked for help from Krishna. And so Krishna came and helped Draupadi by giving her unlimited clothes. Don't we wish sometimes that we have access to unlimited number of clothes just by praying to Krishna, right? So this is an example of how Bhishma, like, we could have done so many things sitting there, like he had so much power, but he didn't do anything, so he was heavily criticized for that. How is this possible that Bhishma did not do anything? But again, he didn't want to go against his vow. So his vow actually was a great impediment for him, because he was forced again and again to side the wrong people, right? Just because of his vow. But internally he was very surrendered to Krishna. And from the Vaishnava perspective here, we understand that no matter how many people with power are around you, how much power you have, how much compassion you have, sometimes that is not enough to save you. And Krishna is the only personality who can cross all these barriers, has the most power and the most compassion, and will come to help us. And we've seen this again and again through many different scriptural references. But the example of Draupadi is a shining example of that. That in an assembly of the most powerful people, she had no help. Right? So why was this happening? Because internally, Bhishma Dev was surrendered to Krishna. His meditation was continuously on Krishna and Vishnu. But externally, he was following all the rules and regulations of his vow and his principles of being constantly supporting the king of the Hastinapur of the Kuru dynasty. So through his example, Krishna wanted to demonstrate that no matter how powerful you are, if you choose the side of adharma, there will only be defeat, right? Dishonor, right? No throne. He didn't get any power. He had no result. He had no power. He never got the kingdom. He never got to sit on the king's throne because he was on the side of adharma. And he had to be defeated by people who are generations younger than him. Arjuna was his grandson, but he had to get defeated by Arjuna. He had to get defeated by Shikhandi. Such a long story that one is. Simply because of his vows and the fact that he was on adharma. So this is a very important lesson. And he is always being used by Krishna as an instrument to show different aspects of dharma, adharma, and at the end of his life, devotion. Okay. So this is how Bhishma's story unfolds. And then we get to the point where there is actually the war happening. And in the war, we all know what happens. There is Arjuna, his charioteer is Krishna, and on the other side is Bhishma and all the other Kauravas. And it is described so nicely that Bhishma, although on the other side, was more, what should I say, he had more benefit, or he was luckier even than Arjuna. Why? Because he was on the other side, he was looking at Krishna's face. Which side was Arjuna on? He was behind. So what was he looking at? Although he was looking at Krishna's back. Although we know that Krishna's back, front, face, feet, eyes, everything has equal potency. But to be constantly gazing at the beautiful face of Krishna, that is what Bhishma was meditating when he was on the battlefield continuously. And so then the war is going on and nothing is happening. So Duryodhana is getting very upset. He goes to Bhishma and says, "You are supposed to be killing these 5 brothers because you are the most powerful archer, you are the most powerful warrior that we have on our side. I think you are doing nepotism, favoritism here, which we see so much in the world, right?" So Bhishma gets very upset because he's just trying to follow his vows and he's never being partial on the battlefield. So finally he says, "Okay, you take these 5 golden arrows. This is one for each of the Pandavas. You can use it, it will directly go to the person you've hit it and will kill the person. So there are 5 arrows, 5 Pandavas, these are yours." Meanwhile, on the other side, what is happening? Krishna obviously knows what is going on between Bhishma and Duryodhana. He immediately alerts Arjuna. "Please go and meet Duryodhana. Tell him that you have one boon that you have promised me. Because I saved you in the past from the Gandharvas." And at that time, Duryodhana says, "Ask anything from me, I'll give it to you, Arjuna." So Arjuna says, "No, I don't want anything right now. But in the future, I may come." And so he goes to Duryodhana and he says, "I'm here to ask for my boon." He says, "What do you want?" He says, "I want those 5 arrows." But again, you have to understand, even Duryodhana, he actually was a very good king. He took good care of his kingdom and people actually liked him. We just see the other side of Duryodhana where he is adharmic. So he had given a vow, he had given his word, and so he hands those to Arjuna, and Arjuna takes them and goes away. So he's stuck again without no tools to kill the Pandavas. So he's super upset. Of course, I'm just paraphrasing how he feels. So he goes back to Bhishma and says, "Now what? Now I don't have the arrows." So he's getting very agitated. And so Bhishma says, "Listen, I am fighting for you. I promise you, either I will kill Arjuna or I will make Krishna break his vow." And what is Krishna's vow? That he will not lift any weapon, because that was the deal between Duryodhana and Krishna, that he will give all his weapons, all his troops, everybody, all the Akshaunis to Duryodhana, and he will be nishastra, without any weapons, just as a chariot driver sitting with Arjuna and not fighting at all. So then Duryodhana is very pleased, because what greater pleasure can he have? Either to discount Krishna or to kill Arjuna. So then the war goes on, and at one point there is a face-off, like there is Arjuna, Krishna, and then there is Bhishma Deva, and Bhishma Deva sees Krishna and showers incessant arrows. These arrows are hitting Arjuna, they are hitting Krishna, and as it hits Krishna, you can see that the arrows like kind of hitting different parts of his body, creating scratches, a little bit of blood starts coming out, right? And looking at this sight, Bhishma Deva is in ecstasy. Why? Because Bhishma's interaction with Krishna was related on Virya Ras. So each devotee has a different way that they interact with Krishna or with, for example, the gopis had Madhurya Ras, Mother Yashoda had Vatsalya Ras, the cows, they had Shanta Ras, right? So similarly, there are some devotees who wanted to just fight with Krishna. That was their way of expressing how much with such pleasure, look at this, my Lord is fighting with me and I'm hitting arrows. And of course Krishna knew that. So just as the gopis were showering Krishna with flowers, Bhishma Dev was showering Krishna with arrows. It was the same mood. And just as Krishna accepted the flowers from the gopis, he also accepted the arrows from Bhishma Dev. And that is the sight that Bhishma Dev was constantly meditating when he left his body. And so this is happening, and then their chariot gets stuck. Arjuna's chariot gets stuck. Arjuna is actually on the main ground fighting. Meanwhile, Bhishma Dev sees this opportunity. And Krishna realizes that Bhishma Dev is going to target Arjuna because he's going to kill Arjuna. That was his promise. In order to protect Arjuna, Krishna gets so angry. He picks up a wheel and starts to charge towards Bhishma Dev. Meanwhile, Arjuna realizes what is happening. And Bhishma is just standing on his chariot watching the sight. That Krishna has, I'm going to read those translations from the Bhagavatam to get the impact of what Bhishma Dev was feeling. There is ash in his hair. You may have seen that picture where Krishna is with white hair. Krishna never has white hair. Because Krishna is always ever youthful. He doesn't need to color his hair. Right? Even when he's 135 years old, he still looks like he's 16. Right? He's always yoga. So, but the dust goes into his hair. His hair is silvery white. He's holding this wheel in both his hands. And on his body is like all these marks of the arrows that have hit him. Imagine this sight in your mind. And there's sweat coming. Now Krishna's body is not material. This is how he is relishing the pastime with his devotee. Because his devotee wants to see him like that. Krishna's body is not material. Krishna doesn't have blue blood and red blood like us. I mean, none of our blood is blue. That's a myth. And he doesn't get sweat. He doesn't get tired. Because his body is not material. But this is how he expresses himself. To reciprocate with his devotees. And so that is a sight that he wanted to see. Meanwhile, Arjuna realizes what is happening. He says, no. And then he goes rushing towards Bhishma and says, stop. Stop. You cannot break your vow. Otherwise, people won't believe you. Right? So it's a very intense situation happening here. And so then the war goes on. On the 10th day, finally, Bhishma is defeated. He's on the bed of arrows. The war goes on. The war finishes. After the war, the next day or so, there is a coronation of Yudhishthira Maharaj, and there's a very detailed explanation of how the coronation happens. And then after the day of coronation, Yudhishthira is still feeling sad. Why is that? You are not allowed to answer. Anybody? He's still feeling sad about the fact that so many people died. He still feels responsibility for the war. Thousands and lakhs of people were killed on the battlefield. And if you read the description of the battlefield when they go to meet Bhishma, it's very scary. Like there's described that there are skulls on the battlefield which are shining like silver. There's bones, animal bones are on the battlefield. There are vultures flying around. It's a very grotesque description. And amongst all of that, Bhishma is lying still alive on the arrows. So anyways, coming back, so he's feeling sad, and so he goes into the chambers where Krishna is resting. And then he says, oh, how are you? How are you doing? Did you get enough rest? This is like the next day. But Krishna doesn't respond at all. Krishna's meditation is fixed on something. So he waits for some time, and then Krishna comes back into the consciousness and he says, what were you thinking of? And he says, I'm meditating on Bhishma Dev. So Bhishma Dev is meditating on Krishna and Krishna is meditating on Bhishma. He says he's going to leave his body soon. We need to go meet him. So he tells all the Pandav brothers, please dress up in as much jewelry as you can put on your body. Wear crowns and wear like really nice clothes. I want Bhishma Dev to see you all in the form that he always wanted you to see him. So they all get dressed, they get their chariots, they go to the battlefield. And I already described the scene on the battlefield. And then they go towards Bhishma Dev there. He's lying there and he's waiting. He's waiting for the Uttarayan. Because Bhishma Dev has this boon that he can pick when he can leave his body. There's this Ichha Maran boon that you can choose when you can leave your body. So the war is over, but he's still waiting. So he's waiting for Uttarayan, that specific time when the sun starts moving into the northern hemisphere. Now you may remember another story of Uttara. Uttara was pregnant with King Parikshit, and a Brahmastra is relieved to kill the baby in the womb. And so she prays to Krishna to save. Now you may argue that Krishna didn't save her husband. Why would he save the child? But she wasn't thinking like that, because every passing has a significance. So she prays to Krishna, and Krishna actually goes inside her womb and protects the embryo. So he gives shelter to Uttara, and therefore one of Krishna's name is also Uttarayan. So Bhishma was not just waiting for the sun to move, Bhishma was also waiting for Krishna to arrive, because that's what he wanted while he came. So finally they all arrive there, and then Bhishma Dev sees Krishna, and as soon as he sees Krishna, he starts to glorify him. Like there's prayers of like Krishna, there's Bhishma Stuti it is called, where he chants all these different mantras and he's like glorifying Lord Krishna. And he's very weak, his voice is very feeble, and Krishna says, no, you cannot die yet. You have one more service left. I want you to give class before you die. Imagine that. Somebody you have to give class here, then you can die. Right? So Bhishma Dev says, what is it? So he says, you need to talk to Yudhishthira Maharaj and convince him about the war, and you should stop feeling morose and sad about all of the things that have happened. And then you must instruct him about the duties, the different dharmas, as a king and as an emperor, how and what should he be doing. And after that, your job is done. So Bhishma says, how can I talk to him when you are here? You are the guru. You have been instructing them. And meanwhile, all the famous and elevated personalities arrive there just to witness this. All the rishis, even like great personalities, Vyasadeva, everybody arrives there. Right? And Krishna says, I just read this to you, it's really, very, very important. He says to Yudhishthira, when that great man leaves, all kinds of knowledge about morality and duty will leave with him. No one can deliver instructions comparable to him, not even me. See, that's what he says about Bhishma Dev. So you can see after all of the events that have happened, now Krishna is revealing to the world what a great devotee Bhishma Dev is. So they go there. And so Bhishma Dev says, I have no energy and I'm in so much pain. He says, I am relieving you of the pain. We will come back tomorrow morning and we will start our discussions. And from that day onwards, Bhishma Dev didn't experience any pain. They all go back to their camp. The next morning they come back. And when Bhishma Dev talks, his voice is back to his original thunderous voice. And they talk for 51 days. 50 days actually. For 50 days, Bhishma instructs Yudhishthira Maharaj on so many different topics. And as part of this Anushasan Parva in the Mahabharata, Bhishma Dev also instructs Yudhishthira Maharaj how to achieve perfection. And what does he chant? Anybody except you? No, Bhishma Suri is what all of the verses. Anybody? Vishnu Sahasranam. That is the first time Vishnu Sahasranam is revealed to the world. All of us know about the Vishnu Sahasranam. So Bhishma Dev chants Vishnu Sahasranam, and those of you who may have read Vishnu Sahasranam, you know that there are 3 parts. And in the first part is conversation between Yudhishthira Uvacha, Bhishma Uvacha. They set the stage. Then you have the 1,000 names, and then you have the Falashruti, which describes the benefit of chanting the Vishnu Sahasranam. So that is also there as part of the Anushasan Parva, the Vishnu Sahasranam, which is chanted by Bhishma Dev. So he gives the complete knowledge, including knowledge about Vishnu, to Yudhishthira Maharaj. And everybody is listening to this. It's not just, there's like even demigods are listening from the heavenly planets, and all the sages are there listening to what Bhishma Dev is saying. It's a very, very glorious. And then where are they situated? On the battlefield. Which shows that you can chant the holy name wherever you are. Even if you are surrounded by dead bodies, you can be chanting the holy name. In fact, that's when you should be chanting the holy name. Right? So this dialogue goes on, and then ultimately Bhishma Dev realizes that the sun is now approaching, the Uttarayan. And then he focuses his attention. He stops giving instructions. He shuts off all his external consciousness and focuses on the face of Krishna. And because Bhishma Dev is interacting with Krishna in Viryaras, what is the form that Krishna chosen? The 4-handed Vishnu form. So everyone else in the battlefield is looking at Krishna in his 2-handed form, but Bhishma Dev's meditation is on the 4-handed form of Vishnu, because that was his meditation. And I'm just going to read to you a couple of these translations by Srila Prabhupada, where Bhishma Dev is describing how he is seeing Krishna. So he says, on the battlefield, the flowing hair of Lord Krishna turned ashen due to the dust raised by the hooves of the horses. And because of his labor, beads of sweat wetted his face. All these decorations, intensified by the wounds dealt by my sharp arrows, were enjoyed by him. Let my mind thus go unto Shri Krishna. Right? So this is what he's meditating on. Fulfilling my vow. So Krishna actually fulfilled Bhishma's vow by picking up the chariot, because Bhishma said, I will either make Krishna take his vow. That was his vow. So Krishna broke his vow to keep the vow of Bhishma. Fulfilling my vow and sacrificing his own promise, he got down from the chariot, took up its wheel and ran towards me hurriedly, just as a lion goes to kill an elephant. He even dropped his outer garment on the way. May he, Lord Shri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who awards salvation, be my ultimate destination. So this is what he's saying. At the moment of death, let my ultimate attraction to be Shri Krishna the personality of Godhead, I concentrate my mind upon the chariot driver of Arjuna, who stood with a whip in his hand and a rope in his left, who was very careful to give protection to Arjuna's chariot by all means. Those who saw him on the battlefield of Kurukshetra attained their original forms after death. Let my mind be fixed upon Lord Krishna. This is the Bhishma Sutta, these verses. So this was his meditation. And as soon as the sun reached the Uttarayan, like the meridian, he left his body. And when he left his body, everything became very quiet on the battlefield. And a large ball of fire emerged from Bhishma Dev's body like a comet and shot into the sky. And he went back to the spiritual world. So that is a very, very instructive story that happened on Uttarayan. So I thought I'll just touch upon that. So Bhishma's whole life is just to be an instrument to all of these different lessons. All the power, all the prestige is given by Krishna and taken away by Krishna. So if we can be an instrument, if we have the capability, if we have the resources, if we have some special skills, ultimately they are all coming from Krishna, because Krishna does say that I am the ability in man. But if we can use it as an instrument for the service of Krishna, then it is a decoration. Otherwise, it is just a way that we get stuck into the material world. From Arjuna's example, after all of this is over, everything is done, Krishna leaves the planet also. So Krishna's pastimes also are finished. As soon as Krishna leaves, Arjuna loses all of his special powers. He is going towards, he's coming back from Dwarka, and he's accosted by dacoits. He has a Gandiva bow, but he can no longer use it. So he uses the Gandiva bow like a stick. So this is when he realizes that, even my pastimes are coming to an end. He loses all the power. So everything that happened was a plan of Krishna, and he was using everything as an instrument to show the difference between dharma and adharma. So all of these pastimes are very instructive, and we should try to read them and understand them and apply them in our day-to-day lives. So this is in brief what the Uttarayan is about. So next year, when it is January 14, you can try to remember all of these pastimes and celebrate a festival in a more meaningful way just than eating different things, which we all do for all festivals, right? But then every festival has a special significance. So thank you so much for listening to what I had to share. Everything I said was part of Srila Prabhupada's books and videos.
Thank you, Mother Satyabhama. Once again, we can give a big round of applause. A lot of stories within the stories in the context of Bhishma Dev's passing. So thank you once again, Mataji, for an educative evening and learning about Bhishma Deva and Sankranti. So we have a lot of announcements, so please bear with me. We would like to share this news of the departure of senior Srila Prabhupada disciple, His Grace Garuda Vahan Prabhu. So him and his late wife, Garuda Vahan Prabhu passed away yesterday morning, and he was based at Owen Sound, Ontario, and his wife, or his late wife, has also been a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Both of them met Prabhupada in the early 70s, and his wife's name is Krishna Karuna Mataji. They both received initiation from Srila Prabhupada in the year 1976 in Toronto, and Prabhuji passed away yesterday morning, and there were final rites that was performed in the evening. But on behalf of the Toronto community, we would like to offer prayers for Prabhu and his family for his onward journey. So we're going to chant the Hare Krishna Mahamantra thrice for Garuda Vahan Prabhu. 1, 2, 3. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thanks to all of you. That was for His Grace Garuda Vahan Prabhuji. We would also like to update you all about upcoming events. One of the major festivities, the first festival for the year, is going to be on January 30th, which is a Friday. It's the appearance day of Nityananda Prabhu. So as Mataji said, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in today's context of the class, we're going to have the appearance of Nityananda Prabhu, and Mahaprabhu's appearance will also be there in the month of March. But this is our first festival for the year on January 30th, and we are planning for an extended program on 30th evening, Friday. We will share more details, but please do block your calendar or evening of Jan 30th to celebrate the appearance of Nityananda Prabhu. What's that? Yes, thank you. That's a good reminder. People are encouraged to wear blue color kurta for Prabhus and saris for the Matajis to honor and celebrate this special festival occasion. And you're all welcome to come for morning program as well, starting from 4:30 a.m.